Hello, I'm Marites Vitug. Welcome to Rappler Talk. Joining us from New York is Ruben Carranza, a lawyer and former commissioner of the PCGG, or Presidential Commission on Good Government. Currently, he's a senior expert at the International Center for Transitional Justice. I'll be talking to Ruben about Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. and what he knows of his family's ill-gotten wealth and his role in protecting and hiding these riches. Please send your comments or questions to the comment section of Facebook, and we'll start the ball rolling. Thank you so much, Ruben, for making time for this interview. And
It's
thank you
always
for
a
joining
pleasure.
us from me. Yeah, so as I said earlier, we're going to focus on the son's role in hiding and protecting the ill-gotten wealth of the family. So maybe, Ruben, let's start with an interesting case of when Marcos Jr. claimed in a testimony in 2007, I think, that his family owns 60% of the shares of the Lucio Tan companies. And this case is still pending in the Supreme Court. Can you please talk a bit about the claim of the Marcoses and explain the deeds, the blank deeds of assignment which were given to Marcos Jr.? I think Ruben is frozen. We'll have to wait for him. But in the meantime, in 2007, Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., in a rare testimony, said in the Sandigan Bayan that his family owns 60% of the shares of the Lucio Tan companies, including Fortune, Tobacco, Allied Bank. Okay, now we're back. Please, Ruben, go ahead.
Sure. So yeah, the case is 005. It's important to remember that cases were originally numbered or filed.
Ruben, I think your audio, is there something wrong with your audio? Can you hear that? There's some sound, crackling sound.
Let me get aware of.
Okay, so in the meantime, as I was saying earlier, it was a rare testimony given by Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. That his late father, before his father died, he turned over documents showing that they own 60% of the Lucio Tan companies and that there were blank deeds of assignment given by the Lucio Tan companies entrusted. Okay, please go ahead, Ruben.
So I was saying this is civil case 005, and there were several of these cases filed by the PCGG as early as 1991. But the Lucio Tan case, unlike, for example, the cases against Eduardo Cojuangco or even the case against the Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos and the Marcos children, the Lucio Tan case continued and is continuing even up to now. As you said, Marites, it's still pending in the Supreme Court. The case was filed as an ill-gotten wealth recovery case. In other words, the PCGG's theory is that Lucio Tan and Ferdinand Marcos and Imelda Marcos, and now the Marcos children as heirs of Ferdinand Marcos, were both involved in acquiring and keeping and hiding ill-gotten wealth. Now, most Filipinos are familiar with the companies involved in the Lucio Tan case, from Asia Brewery to Fortune Tobacco to Allied Bank. And the PCGG is seeking the recovery of those assets as ill-gotten wealth. Originally, those assets were sequestered, but a few years ago, the Supreme Court lifted the sequestration of those assets, but it doesn't mean that the case has been settled.
So during the court testimony in the Sandigan Bayan, the lawyer of Lucio Tan, Estelito Mendoza, said the question that needed to be answered is this: did the Marcos shares in the Lucio Tan companies come from stolen wealth? That's the key to the case. That's what he said. So please talk about why this is stolen wealth.
Before I even talk about that, let me, and this is really important to say, Estelito Mendoza is full of hypocrisy. this person who lawyers for Lucio Tan also lawyers for Imelda Marcos in other cases. In other words, even there, he's already representing conflicting interests, as I will mention later. But the conflict of interest in the representation of Estelito Mendoza for these persons goes beyond, just representing Marcos and a Marcos crony. He represented the Republic of the Philippines when he was Solicitor General of the Marcos dictatorship, during the Marcos dictatorship. And the PCGG already raised that all the way to the Supreme Court, that conflict of interest. Among other things, he represented the central bank for the Republic of the Philippines when Allied Bank was being questioned in relation to its assets. So now he represents Lucio Tan and Allied Bank. The Supreme Court, however, ruled that Estelito Mendoza can go ahead and represent these conflicting interests, and there were various reasons advanced by the Supreme Court. Most of it legal acrobatics, and I'm sorry to say this, and I know there are people who trust the Supreme Court and who hope the Supreme Court will rule fairly, but in many cases they don't, especially when it comes to the Marcoses and to cases involving Estelito Mendoza. Why? Because Estelito Mendoza was the appointer of many of the former and even current justices of the Supreme Court. They were former solicitors in the OSG, they were former judges, they were former career prosecutors, all of them going through the office of Estelito Mendoza, Solicitor General. So, just to answer that question, that's not a correct theory, that all that the government has to prove is that this is not from, or that this is from government funds. That's not how ill-gotten wealth is acquired. I mean, that's not the only way ill-gotten wealth is acquired. Ill-gotten wealth, and the Supreme Court has said this in several cases, can be acquired by directly stealing from the public treasury, embezzlement. Ill-gotten wealth can be acquired through bribery, bribing a public official so that you can get favors from the government, from that official. Ill-gotten wealth can be acquired by graft, by skimming off money from contracts, transactions of the government. Ill-gotten wealth can be acquired by influence peddling, by claiming that you have the influence to affect one decision or another. So there are many ways to acquire ill-gotten wealth, and it's not just by getting public money and then enriching yourself. So Estelito Mendoza is wrong. The reason he makes this argument is because he thinks that he can show that Lucio Tan's assets were not directly taken from government funds and then turn into investments in these corporations. But that's also not the case here.
And since this case still pending in the Supreme Court, and since I saw a photograph, and I think you've seen this too, when Bongbong Marcos was senator, he was seen with Lucio Tan smiling, with other Filipino-Chinese businessmen. Apparently, there may have been a settlement. But what do you expect to happen to this pending case in the Supreme Court? What is your scenario if Bongbong wins?
This is what I've said about not just Mr. Tan, but many other Marcos cronies. And the reason we call them cronies is that it's in the law. It's in Executive Order 1, 2, and 13 that the PCGG and the Sandigan Bayan cases involve cronies, associates, business associates of the Marcos dictatorship. I've said this about all the cronies, that Marcos Jr., if and when he wins, which is still a big if, he will go after these cronies. He will go after what the Marcos family claims are their shares in the corporations, in the property, in all the assets, secret or not secret, publicly known or hidden, of these different Marcos cronies. And this is not the first time in the Lucio Tan case that they've done this. They've done this with respect to PLDT shares connected to the Cojuangco family, who previously controlled PLDT. They have done this with respect to San Miguel shares, involving Eduardo Danding Cojuangco. They've done this with other cronies. They are going to do it to Mr. Tan, to Lucio Tan. They're going to do it to other Marcos cronies who still keep a lot of wealth in the Philippines.
I'll just pose a scenario, Ruben, because in the testimony or affidavit rather of Rolando Gapu, the financial executor of Marcos, he said that apart from the 60% equity of Mr. Marcos in the Lucio Tan companies, Lucio Tan paid Marcos from 60 million pesos a year to 100 million pesos a year. So that was like just easy money given to the president. I was thinking, instead of going to the judicial system and the courts work so slowly, and he's president, he might, if he is seen as influencing the Supreme Court, that's not going to be a good start for him. So do you consider the possibility that the payments will just continue quietly?
I'm not sure that that's all Marcos Jr., his mother, and his sisters and their husbands will want to happen. This family has been salivating at the thought of finally getting their hands on what they claim are their rightful, in quotation marks, rightful shares in ill-gotten wealth held for them by different cronies. Which is why when you look at the transcript of the hearing in the Lucio Tan case, when Marcos Jr. testified, and he testified as a hostile witness of the PCGG, not in favor of Lucio Tan, he claimed that his father, Marcos Sr., had groomed him to succeed Marcos Sr. as the business person controlling this vast secret business empire of the Marcoses held for them by their cronies. He talks about how he met Lucio Tan, how he at first was taken in by Lucio Tan, introduced to the different corporations, toured around Asia Brewery, Fortune Tobacco, but that later on that this relationship soured, and it started going sour because Lucio Tan presumably sensed that the Marcos dictatorship was going to fall, and it did fall, and then Lucio Tan probably felt that his whatever agreements he had with the Marcoses was no longer valid. They weren't valid in the first place, but were no longer bound him to honor whatever agreement they had. So it's important to remember that the Marcoses inculcated in their children the idea that they own this property. It's a vulgar, it's wrong, it's immoral, but the Marcoses essentially told Marcos Jr., Aimee, and Irene Marcos that they were wealthy from ill-gotten wealth, but that they should keep it secret. So if you look at the records in this case, all the agreements were secret. All the contracts supposedly entered into by Lucio Tan and Ferdinand Marcos were in blank. The shares that were endorsed supposedly by Lucio Tan to the Marcos family were in blank. In blank meaning Ferdinand Marcos or his children could just write their names or the names of any of their dummies and then claim that they're now the owners of these shares. And these are significant, even controlling shares, because remember, Marcos Jr. claims 60% of Lucio Tan's assets, not 50%, but 60%. There was in the Gapud affidavit, in the Gapud statement that you mentioned, Gapud mentions an interesting point. He says Lucio Tan wanted to haggle with the Marcos family to bring it down to 50%, 50-50. The Marcoses insisted on having 60% of Lucio Tan's assets.
A story behind the scenes, no, Ruben? So first, Bongbong Marcos Jr. was really groomed to take over the interest of the family in the various businesses. So number one, we mentioned Lucio Tan's huge empire. Number two, can you talk a bit about Security Bank? Upon reading Bongbong Marcos' testimony in Sandigan Bayan, Bongbong said that he held offices. He had an office in Security Bank and in the 70s and early 80s, and that he met with Rolando Gapud, the financial executor of the Marcos interests, and that Gapud, I think, briefed him about this. So can you talk about the Security Bank and how Marcos got to own at least 51%, right, of the bank?
Right. Well, before going into Security Bank itself, let's talk a little bit about Rolando Gapud. Rolando Gapud is still alive. He's old, but he's still alive, and he has never gone back to the Philippines since 1986, just after the dictatorship fell. He fled, and you can see he executed 2 sworn statements. You can see in his first sworn statements, he explained in that first sworn statement why he has not returned to the Philippines. He said he fled because he was afraid for his life especially after executing these two affidavits. So the first one and then a subsequent one. The first affidavit was executed in January of 1987. The second affidavit was executed in August, a few months later, of 1987. And in the first affidavit, and then he refers to it again in the second one, in August 1987, Rolando Gapud claims that he made a list of assets that the Marcoses would claim to be theirs, but held for them by different cronies. I actually counted the number of cronies and assets in that list, and they, in terms of the number of assets, they number over about 230 different corporations, ranging from mining companies to banks to oil exploration companies to logging concessionaires to hotels and to communications companies. Everything from Rustan's investment to the United Coconut Planters Bank, and of course, Security Bank, Allied Bank, Fortune Tobacco, other companies. Rolando Gapud made this list, but this is one important thing to note. He didn't make this list alone. He made this list with the help of Aimee Marcos. And that's why in the PCGG's records, in the commission, we would often talk about this, because this was started by the Salonga Commission, we would often talk about this as the Aimee list. Aimee Marcos was there when Rolando Gapud started making this list. They were afraid that the dictatorship would fall, and then they started to assemble this list. It wasn't just a list. It refers to different agreements between Marcos and several Marcos cronies. There are, I think, about 33 of them named here. Some known, some unknown to Filipinos today. Everyone from Hans Menzi, Bulletin Chairs, to Lucio Tan, Allied Bank, to Juan Ponce Enrile, Jaca Investments, to Jose Y. Campos, Oriental Petroleum, to even Razon is mentioned here, Manila International Port Terminals. There's Rustan's and Tantoco. There's Duavit and Alta Tierra Wood Resources. There's Yulo, King Ranch. There's even a Villar and a Cartier Realty Development Corporation. There is, of course, Cojuangco and Coco Trading Companies. And there's Gapud himself, Security Bank and Trust Company, which, as you said, was majority owned by Marcos through several dummies. One of those dummies was, in fact, a person that some Filipinos old enough to remember would remember in terms of his name, Dewey D, D-E-E. Dewey D fled the Philippines in the 1980s, sought asylum in Canada, and when he reached Canada and sought asylum there, he claimed that he was running away in fear for his life as well, supposedly because of debts. But the strangest thing is that if he was afraid of being killed because supposedly he owed several persons, he then disclosed to the Canadian authorities that he was a frontman for Ferdinand Marcos in Security Bank. So you put one and one together. He was afraid because he had debts, but he was also disclosing that he was a Marcos frontman, a Marcos crony in Security Bank. Who was he afraid of? So that's the story of Security Bank. There were 3 or 4 frontmen, including Gapud and Dewey D, who represented Marcos in the acquisition of Security Bank, and in the Gapud affidavits, and in the Lucio Tan trial, Marcos Jr. casually talks about having an office in Security Bank. Is that unusual? Yes, as it is, because why would the son of the dictator have an office in a bank? But that's not the most unusual thing. The most unusual thing is that it was Security Bank that was the main conduit at one point of Marcos' ill-gotten wealth coming in from these different corporations that he claimed to have a share in. They would funnel money to him, as you said, Marites. Lucio Tan paid him several millions a month. And then Security Bank would then be the conduit for sending this money out to Switzerland, not directly to Swiss banks, but to different countries such as Panama and Hong Kong, and then they would end up in Marcos Swiss bank accounts. That was the role of Security Bank during the Marcos dictatorship.
Ruben, I'd just like to show, this is the Aimee list. I don't know if it's clear enough, but just to show that there is this list that the PCGG refers to as the Aimee list, and Ruben talked about. And
at the top of that document, you will see something corrected by Gapud himself. It says was taken by there was an initial, but he replaced it with IMM.
Yes, documents taken by SPA for deposit, and then he changed it to IMM. Email Amy Marcos Manotoc, I think. And this I'll just read briefly. Exhibit B to the affidavit of Fernando Gapun, which was done in Hong Kong in 19. I think this was early 87 or 86.
86. I may have made a mistake in saying 87. 86, yes.
Okay. And also very interesting, just to document it, what Ruben said. These are the exact words of Gapud. He said, in 1983, Amy Marcos Manotoc, Mr. Marcos's daughter, decided to bring some order to Mr. Marcos's scattered stock portfolio. So she gathered all the shares and prepared a list thereof. In the course of this endeavor, she showed me the list, the one we showed you earlier. And she did so because, and this is important, she wanted me to talk to some of the Marcos partners in these businesses to assist her in collecting any outstanding share certificates and other documents of ownership. So what will happen to this, Ruben, if Bongbong wins? I mean, not all the 200 plus are still available for the taking, right?
Right, and that's both the tragedy and, in a way, karma of crony capitalism. It's not only is it illegal and corrupt, it's also very inefficient in terms of a capitalist model, because there is no investment whatsoever in terms of actual capital by the parties involved, not by the dictator nor by his cronies. Maybe, of course, some of the cronies will claim, well, I had money, I invested it, but Marcos coerced me into sharing these assets with him. And that's one of the claims that Lucio Tan, for example, or even other cronies have said in the PCGG cases, that they were coerced by Marcos to part with some of their shares of stock, so to make Marcos the co-owner. What's interesting here, Marites, is that even before I became PCGG commissioner, I actually was a volunteer lawyer for the PCGG. And one of the first cases I handled as a volunteer lawyer was civil case 005, the marking of evidence. In other words, pre-trial, we were not yet going to trial, no witnesses, but we were marking documents we were going to present later as evidence. And I remember this vividly. One of the documents that I marked as evidence for the PCGG, and it has been used in the trial, it was used much later, was a piece of paper, Malacanang stationery, in which Marcos wrote a note on the side. The letter was actually a memorandum to the central bank governor, Jaime Laya, and the memorandum talked about the problems of, if I'm not mistaken, Allied Bank at that time. When the peso crashed and there was a bank run and people were withdrawing their money from Allied Bank, they sought help from the central bank. Marcos made a note. He says, Jimmy, Jaime Laya, do something. I remember that vividly because I was marking it, and at the same time, the opposing counsel, the lawyers for Lucio Tan, were already the same people who still represent Lucio Tan now, Estelito Mendoza, and someone running for senator, Gilbert Teodoro, who has obviously not just practiced law, but practiced law on the side of the Marcoses, or at least the Marcos cronies. So what this tells us is that this is a long history of the Marcoses and their cronies working together, earning profit, accumulating ill-gotten wealth. In the case of Marcos, transferring it to Switzerland. The Marcos cronies perhaps transferred it elsewhere, but some of them did reinvest whatever profit they had from this crony capitalist system into the Philippines. But after the fall of the dictatorship, some of these cronies definitely thought that they were out of the woods, that they were no longer bound by these ill-gotten agreements with the Marcos family. But if and when Marcos Jr. and the Marcoses return to power, I'm sure that the Marcoses will enforce these agreements, will get back what they claim is theirs, and will insist that the Marcos cronies return, in quotation marks, these assets to them. So those Marcos cronies should be aware of that, should remember this, and should be aware of what will happen if Marcos Jr. becomes president of the Philippines.
Yes, another item here in our talking points, Ruben, is PhilComSat. Although we're not very familiar with the ins and outs of PhilComSat, but at least we know that, again, since Marcos, the dictator, groomed his son to take over the family interests in various companies, Bongbong was appointed chairman of the board of PhilComSat, I think in 85, and then his salary was anywhere from $9,000 to $97,000 a month. And before EDSA, he was able to siphon off $500,000. It was approved apparently by the board of PhilComSat. So Bongbong Marcos knew what this was all about. But anyway, can you talk a bit about PhilComSat?
Not just knowledge, but participation.
Oh yes, okay.
Because
go ahead.
The thing about this is PhilComSat was, and maybe not as much now, but it was very strategic for the Philippines, a strategic company, because it controlled satellite communications for the Philippines. At that time, satellite communications was new. So whether you broadcast TV shows from outside the country or from the Philippines, or you tried to communicate using satellite networks that the Philippines did not have, that the Philippines had to pay for, the only way for any Filipino or Filipino company to use the satellite system, TV channels, radio stations, telephone companies, was to run it through PhilComSat. PhilComSat was the only entity authorized by the dictatorship to contract with foreign satellite companies. And that's why this monopoly was important, because obviously it generated a lot of profit for the Marcos family. It was Roberto Benedicto who represented Marcos in getting PhilComSat to acquire these satellite contracts. And all that PhilComSat had to do was parcel out satellite contracts to different corporations, different TV stations, which, by the way, Marcos has also controlled. So there was profit at both ends. There was nothing to do, in other words, except to sit there as a PhilComSat chairperson and earn $97,000 a month, which is what Marcos Jr. did. But the other interesting part of this is Marcos Jr. was not even in the Philippines for almost 10 years. From 1974 to 1982 or 83, he was supposedly in school. Never got a degree in Oxford, never got a degree in Wharton, spent a lot of money doing nothing and getting nothing out of it. But he came back, he gets $10,000 to $90,000 a month just for sitting in a company that doesn't really do anything but monopolize satellite communications.
Yes, and maybe the last item in our talking points is on the Swiss deposits, because here we just want to let our viewers and listeners know that Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., as Ruben said, had knowledge of the family's ill-gotten wealth, and beyond that, he participated in these illegal endeavors. So, Ruben, the Swiss deposits, you mentioned, I know that you've talked about this, but just to remind our viewers and listeners, what did Bongbong Marcos know of the Swiss deposits, and what did he do to protect these ill-gotten riches?
Even before the Marcos family fled the Philippines in 1986, Marcos Jr. was already the beneficiary of these Swiss bank accounts. According to my UP Law classmate, Harry Roque, now running for senator, and this is something perhaps voters should remember, Marcos was too young to have known about corruption. That's a lie. And he knows it. My classmate, Harry Roque, knows it. It's a lie. He may have been very young when the first Swiss bank accounts were opened in 1968, William Saunders, Jane Ryan, but this went on for the next 15 years, when Marcos Jr. was already in his 20s, when Marcos Jr. was spending money in Wharton or in Oxford, and when he came back to be vice governor of Ilocos. So he was a beneficiary and a knowing beneficiary of corruption. It was impossible for him not to have known how much in Swiss bank accounts his parents had, because he was aware. He himself tried to file income tax returns as Ilocos Norte governor, and we know that he didn't actually file for many of the years he was vice governor. But his father and mother filed their own income tax returns in some years, and the total income tax that they paid in the 20 years they were in power was 8 million pesos only. 8 million pesos only. So where did the income that became the Swiss bank accounts come from? From ill-gotten wealth. And we've talked about how this was obtained by the Marcos family. This was directly from public coffers. This was directly from bribery, from embezzlement, from undue influence. So Marcos Jr. knew as a beneficiary where the ill-gotten wealth that went into Swiss banks came from. But the most important role that he has up to now is hiding and perhaps attempting to withdraw this ill-gotten wealth. In fact, among all the presidential candidates in the Philippines, he's the only one who really, really badly wants to withdraw ill-gotten wealth. So in Hawaii, just a few days after they arrived, a person named Michael de Guzman went to see him together with Erwin Ver, who was with them when they fled to Hawaii. Michael de Guzman, according to other accounts, was a tour guide, someone who toured the Marcos children around in Vienna, Austria during the dictatorship where they met. He even helped them acquire a Rolls Royce, if I'm not mistaken. You might have seen a picture of that Rolls Royce. But Michael de Guzman became a self-styled banker years later. He then went to Honolulu, where the Marcoses were in exile, and told the spouses, Ferdinand and Imelda, that he could try and get some of the money still stuck in Switzerland and give them to the Marcos family. Now, remember that at this point, the Swiss bank deposits were not yet frozen. It was difficult for the Marcoses to withdraw them, however, because the Americans, the US government, was monitoring their activities, including their phone calls. So what did Marcos Jr. do? With Michael de Guzman still waiting in the Hawaii house where they were in exile, Marcos Jr. drove to the airport. He did not leave. He did not go on a flight. He was looking for a public payphone. A public payphone that the US government, presumably he thought, would not be able to monitor. Who did he call? He called their banker in Switzerland. What did he say? He told the banker that this Michael de Guzman would possess a document from his father and mother allowing de Guzman to transfer assets from the Swiss bank accounts to accounts outside of Switzerland that were going to be untraceable and could not be frozen. He called someone named Fessler in Credit Suisse, and he may have called Fessler as well as others in that period he was on the phone at the Honolulu airport. He wasn't aware, however, that Fessler himself then informed Swiss authorities, presumably, about that phone call, and that others finally realized what was happening. A few days after Marcos Jr. made that phone call to the Marcos Swiss banker, Switzerland froze their accounts. So if there is someone to blame for the freeze on Marcos' assets in Switzerland, among them is Marcos Jr.
Quite interesting, Ruben. We have a question from one of our viewers, Senor Macamondo. A series of questions, but I'll ask maybe the last question, pinaka-last niyang question. How much effect, Ruben, in your opinion, can sitting presidents, past and present, have in retrieving the ill-gotten wealth of the Marcoses through the years?
Well, this is the PCGG. It's called the Presidential Commission on Good Government. It exists by law, but it is supervised directly by the president. And you can only have either of two things: a president who actually wants to recover ill-gotten wealth, and we've only seen perhaps two, maybe at most three presidents want to do that. Cory Aquino, to some extent Fidel Ramos, and certainly Benigno Aquino III. The other possibility is you have a PCGG that actually has the political will and the competence to do that. And that depends on whether they are appointed by the president in the first place. Who will a possible Marcos Jr. as president appoint to the PCGG? Maybe he'll appoint his sister because she already made a list of assets that they want to get back.
So I'll ask his earlier question, also same listener or viewer, Senor Macamondo. Maybe this is a bit personal. You were sued before by Imelda Marcos and you had experiences during martial law, as well as being a former collegian editor. Did you receive threats, grave threats, while working with the PCGG? Was there any pressure from previous presidents to stop any actions versus the Marcoses?
Well, I received three kinds of of things. One was, of course, threats. There were phone calls that were very suspicious to our then house in Quezon City, and occasionally my grandmother, who does not speak Tagalog, would answer, and so the threats were indecipherable for her. She couldn't understand the threats in Tagalog, but she would then relay it to me, and it sounded like threats. There was black propaganda in media against me, done by journalists who were obviously in the pay of some Marcos cronies. But there were actual libel suits against me. One of them was, as was mentioned by the person who asked, a libel case by Imelda Marcos, who sued me just a few months after we won in the Supreme Court the recovery of the $680 million from Switzerland. She sued me for libel. And when I responded and said I was happy to go to trial to prove the truth of what I said, that her husband was a thief and a dictator, she never pursued the case. She was, and still is, obviously afraid of the truth.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ruben, for sharing. I think you're a repository of ill-gotten wealth information. Instead, you should be our library. But anyways, sa ating mga nanonood at nakikinig, pinakita ko natin na at least 4 lang na instances sa claim ng Marcoses ng 60% ng Lucio Tan's companies, yung Swiss deposits, yung Philcomsat, yung monopoly na kwento ni Ruben, tapos yung Security Bank. 4 lang ito, maybe there are others, na Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. had knowledge of the source of the family's ill-gotten wealth and participated in covering up and in protecting this for their own use. So, sabi nga ni Ruben, baka gusto niya mag-withdraw, pero ng ill-gotten wealth. So, on that note, we always trust Filipinos to come up with lines, mga hugot lines. Salamat, Ruben, and we hope to continue this conversation at marami pa tayong pag-uusapan. Sana nga mag-open yung PCGG ng kanilang library so that may tulong naman si Ruben sa pagkukwento sa atin ng ating this part of our history. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.